How's it going, everybody? Bryan, Alvarez, and Dave Meltzer here. Wrestling Observer Radio. Breaking news audio, June 6, 2018. Figure4online.com/wrestlingobserver.com. Jury in the case of Dr. Christopher Amon versus Phil Brooks and Scott Colton ruled that neither man were liable for any damages against the WWE physician in the defamation lawsuit. This from the front page of WrestlingObserver.com. Amon's attorneys were asking for $3.989 million in damages, claiming $1 for every listener of the Art of Wrestling podcast that the Punk show supposedly had. And that's the story. Neither side needs to pay any money to the other, and it's all over.
Yeah, it's a moral victory for Punk, but and Cabana. More Punk because obviously he was the target. I really was. I've been reading a lot about the case today and writing about it, and I've had a lot of communication with different people involving it. So I think like the thing that struck me in the end is the closing remarks of Amon's attorney. I really think when I read them, I was really put off by them. And I think that probably had a lot to do with what the jury thought as well. I mean, the asking for the $3 million, almost $4 million essentially. I think that after everything that happened in the case, I just think that had to be a negative. And also him trying to push his, like when you're a lawyer, I mean, the thing is, it's a lot like wrestling in the sense that if you do something that is believable and holds water, even if it's a little bit, like not real, it's a little bit skewed or whatever, people will buy it or at least take it seriously. But when you go too far, and this happens a lot in court, when you go too far, the jury's going to feel that, like, this is bullshit. And I think that, like, that much money is a bullshit thing. The other thing, too, is when he tried to push, his big thing that he's trying to push is that there was no lump, that the lump is all made up. And this is after, the physician's assistant who removed the lump had testified by videotape. This was after the massage therapist testified seeing it. This is after Cabana testified seeing it. It's after Punk testified talking about it. It's after AJ Lee testified seeing it. To try to push that there was no lump and he made it up at that point, you're just insulting people's intelligence. You're asking them not to believe everyone. The other part of that is his idea of why this happened is that Punk was mad because he wanted to get into the main event of that year's WrestleMania. Now, granted, to a jury, they're not going to understand this. And he did want to get into the main event of WrestleMania. Obviously, was a goal of his life. And he thought that Amon, because Amon said what he said at the Royal Rumble, it kept him from getting in the main event at WrestleMania. And it's like... What do you mean what he said at the Royal Rumble? When he told him to get out of the ring? When he told the people backstage that he's hurt, when he told them, he didn't tell them to get out of the ring, but when he told the people backstage he was hurt and they told him to stay down for a long time, they wanted him out of the match, that he couldn't put on the performance that he wanted to, and therefore, and wow people, that cost him the main event at WrestleMania. Now, I mean, we all know what that card was going to be, and he was going to wrestle Triple H at WrestleMania, and it was not the main event. The main event was supposed to be Orton and Batista, and obviously Daniel Bryan ended up being in that match as well because Batista didn't get over the way they expected. But there was nothing he was going to do in that match that was going to get him in that championship match at WrestleMania. If he was going to stay, obviously he was going to be wrestling Triple H on that show. So unless Triple H, I suppose if Triple H got hurt, but the Royal Rumble would have nothing to do with it, and they had, and Batista didn't get over and Triple H got hurt, could he have ended up in a three-way in WrestleMania? Yes, he could have. But that would have required, and the Batista didn't get over, but it would have required Triple H being hurt because Triple H isn't going to lose his opponent. But I and again with the jury, I don't know how they're going to take that because I don't know that they really would understand pro wrestling. I know how I read it. It's just like, you're stretching too far, and I couldn't believe it at all. And I think that probably didn't help. Although, when you get right down to it, I mean, the key to the case was that Amon wasn't damaged in any way that was tangible. I mean, he has the same job. Nobody at his work treats him any differently because of what Punk said. Maybe some people will look at him differently. Maybe he'll get some cat calls from fans, and he'll probably get more by doing this trial than he would have gotten had he just left it alone. It's been a couple of years. Everyone pretty much moved on. This thing brought it all back, and if he's going to get any grief, he's bringing it on himself by doing the trial. The trial, made it a big issue once again. So I guess that, that was the key to the situation.
This is simplifying everything, but I mean, he said early on that I still work for WWE, and nobody seems to look at me any differently. Nobody seems to be treating me any differently, and it ruined my Thanksgiving. And but hold on, there was a thing that other people had said. I don't even think this was even brought up in the trial about how his premiums had gone up.
Well, we already talked about that the other night.
Yeah, and then other people were like, "Well, everyone's premiums have gone up."
Look, if he had any. If there was, my belief, the reason that he didn't bring that up is because it would have been shot down so bad.
Sure.
Because that the premiums going up was something that, in fact, he had said at one point, but it obviously had nothing to do with that podcast.
Yeah, but my point is, like, if he didn't have that, what did he have? That's like the whole thing. This whole thing to me, like, if he didn't even have that, even if it turned out that there was no lump. That CM Punk was lying about the lump. If there was no
lump, he'd have won.
But what would he have won?
He would have. Well, he would have been defamed. He would have won. He would have won something if there was no lump.
I mean, I doubt he's going to get $4 million. I mean,
I don't know. I don't think he would have gotten $4 million either, because that's a ridiculous number. But he would have won. He would have won the case if there was no lump. If the jury believed there was no lump and Punk had made all that up to defame him, yeah, he would have. He would have gotten punitive damages on that one for sure. Even if there was no, material loss of income. I mean, they're not going to look the other way at somebody lying to that degree. I mean, Punk.
So is that basically why, at the end of the day, he insisted there was no lump, even though everybody said there was a lump? Like, that was the last thing that he had here?
Well, that was his lawyer insisting on it, yeah. Well, he did. Punk said that he saw it, or was aware of it, and asked to be treated for it. And, I mean, one of the things that's going to come out of this is that, there's a couple things in there, like there were some conversations, text conversations between the medical staff and WWE, because I guess that at the point where Punk said that he had told Amon about the lump, and I think I guess asked for him to take it out. I mean, AJ was there, and AJ was real adamant, apparently. And, it led to texts of, AJ's, to the other doctors, kind of making fun of AJ for, getting involved and all that. And that probably, I don't think that it's like, that didn't make a difference in the trial, but it's not a good look for the doctors to kind of laugh about, the wife is, getting all uppity type of thing. It's just not a good look for doctors. The other thing is that, it coming out, this was not good for WWE. I mean, number one, like we talked about the other night, 20 years from now, if Punk has CTE or if he's having memory issues or something like this and he opens up a lawsuit, yes, you can go in there and argue that doing UFC probably didn't help his cause, but they certainly have no defense for him going through that table right after that they believed, and everyone believed, that he had a concussion, and he still went through that table 39 minutes later. So there's that, and then there was also the idea that the doctors were handing out, Z-Packs and not logging them, and they weren't logging all the medical stuff. And I will be willing to bet that there will be a memo that comes through to those doctors very quickly that this will never happen again. And they're going to have to be more, they're going to have to be everything's going to have to be written down. And I think some of the talent may be unhappy because they're going to have to go through more channels, and it won't be as easy. But I sense, that, because WWE is very, very, it's so conscious right now of its public image of anything. And, it's so different from 15, 20 years ago when, Vince wanted to be the Oakland Raiders and didn't care what anybody thought and screw everyone. Now, I mean, they don't want to be viewed badly by anybody. And if there's an issue, I mean, not if we cover it, but if there is anything that is threatening to go mainstream that would hurt the company right now or hurt the company's image, other than like the Saudi deal, and that didn't, the real issues there never really got out anyway. But I mean, something that, it's like, well, they shouldn't have done it. And that's not really the issue of should they do the show or not. I mean, it's an issue, but it's more, there's the issues, as far as like, the dichotomy and the contradiction between the way they push the women and then going and doing that show and the treatment of women, obviously, in Saudi Arabia, and the commentary on the show and all that. That's an issue, but they didn't get hammered for it outside of, some people in wrestling and not a whole lot of people in wrestling. So that's not going to make them change, but anything that's going to break, and I've seen it time after time, they don't want that publicity, and that's just, and I get it. Look at, they're in a different league now than they were years ago. I mean, they're on TV stations that are paying them a ton of money, and even more going forward. They've got deals with Mattel. They've got deals with more mainstream people than ever before that don't want to be associated with low-life pro wrestling, so they have to act like they are anything but that going forward. So anything like this, I just expect that there will be some changes as far as medical goes. The question is why did this thing go forward? And I have my theories. Punk has outright said that WWE was funding it, and nobody's denied that. I don't know that it's true. Nobody certainly has ever denied it that it's true. So if that's the case, that would make sense. Because again, like we talked about the other night, the whole thing of Punk, Punk really lashed out at, and it wasn't Dr. Amon. If you ever listen to that podcast, he kind of knocked the medical staff, but Dr. Amon's name was mentioned twice. But most of the stuff was making fun of Vince and Triple H. And, that's, I think that they didn't, I think that they'll take criticism from people and look the other way. But for whatever reason, I just think that the whole Punk thing, for whatever reason, I think that it got it, obviously it was an issue. And I think that they thought they had a winning case. I think they thought that Duffy, not being a doctor, somehow was going to win the case because he called him a doctor, and he wasn't. He was a physician's assistant. That he got, he called him Patrick Bateman on the podcast and not Patrick Duffy. Things like that are, the idea that the lump was on the waistband and now it's on the, and they had photos from the Royal Rumble where they showed the waistband and there's no evidence of any lump there because the lump was well below the waistband. But I think that, they were looking at that and they felt that he, told stories that weren't true. Ryback said, but, again, it's Ryback. So it's like, but that's not saying that's not true. But, Ryback said that he made up the conversation with him that he talked about on the podcast. Obviously, the big thing of it not being culture is staff or, MRSA. And that's a fact that they thought that would, that contradiction would make it that he lied, that they can convince the jury that he lied. But in the end, that, it wasn't enough. There weren't damages, and, the claim that there was no lump, I'm when I read everything that happened, there's too many people that saw it. There's too many people who described it. They described it. They didn't describe it all exactly the same, but you're not going to have people describe it, all the same. They described it similarly enough, and that kind of, I think that really was what, to me, that was a real key to the case was, that. And, a lot of the stuff they knew a lot of what people were going to testify to, before it ever happened. There were depositions done. I guess that maybe they thought that when they presented the case that they would be able to impugn. I guess they felt that the Duffy deposition would be, by saying that he wasn't screaming in pain the way he said on the podcast he was screaming in pain, would somehow be seen as a contradiction. I don't know. Like, that's the kind of stuff where I hear it and I just go, let's put myself in that situation. I was, I was in a similar situation, and like I said, it was the most painful thing I can ever remember. It hurt like hell. I might say I was screaming in pain, but I probably wasn't really screaming. I was probably moaning, but I could say I was screaming. I think when I was in that pain, I felt I was screaming in pain, but did I scream really loud where a doctor would go, like if a doctor goes, oh, how did Dave react in that situation? He'd probably go, well, it's probably routine of what anyone would react like in that situation. I probably was not all that different from anybody else. But, to me, the person getting it done, it's like, it was it's pretty harrowing and just painful as all hell. So I can kind of look at that and just go, yeah, I can see where the doctor describes it this way and Punk describes it this way, and accept that nobody's lying in that situation. Especially when you're talking about, someone kind of telling a story and all that. So that's kind of the situation. But I mean, the problem at the end is that they're out their legal fees. It's like Punk won. He won a moral victory. Cabana should have never been in this. And I mean, that's another thing. And I think that, like, from a jury standpoint, the idea of going after Cabana, it's like, I know why you do it. Lawyers have told me why you would do it. Morally, it's completely unfair. Suing Cabana was bullshit. From any kind of a moral standpoint, I know that the legal system is not moral, but still, when you're dealing with a jury, there's going to be an issue like that. And I think that the jury, as far as Cabana goes, they have to be thinking, what are they suing him for? The idea that the claim was that Punk knew, or that Cabana knew that Punk was lying on the podcast, didn't care, and loaded it up. And it's like, that's a tough thing to prove, that he didn't know, and he knowingly knew Punk was lying, and he still put the podcast up, and that defamed Amon. I mean, it's like, is there a possibility that happened? Of course, but to prove that, I mean, there was nothing in that case that did anything to come close to that. So you have that aspect of going after someone who the jury probably thought was a completely innocent bystander. So that's not going to, again, that was, I think in court, I think that was a mistake too.
So that's the story on the trial. Punk now goes on to fight this weekend.
Yeah. So
after all of this.
Yeah. He said he's been training, and he's in good shape. He was training in the morning before the trial. He would train at night after the trial. It's still not the same. He said he had some partners. He was doing stuff. It's not the same as being in Milwaukee in camp. I mean, I'm sure, look, he knows the stakes that he's in, and this is a big, big deal to him, obviously. And he's a dedicated, hardworking guy. I mean, the one thing that all those guys in that camp, in the Rufus camps, would say about him is that he had no ego. He didn't come across like a star. He learned from the ground up, and he worked really, really hard. All the clips that you see of him, he worked really hard. He tried. He's out of his league in the sport, obviously. They put him in a situation where, maybe he wins, maybe he doesn't. If he wins, what is it? I'm not sure what it really matters, because it's not like he could beat anyone else on the UFC roster. Do they bring in like, another guy who's not a fighter to face him again? I mean, maybe not. I don't know. If he waxes the guy, maybe. If he loses, I'm sure, we'll never see him again. And if he wants to fight, there'll be promoters who will book him to fight. I mean, Bellator will book him, I would think. And everybody would give him a fight just because he's a name that maybe people will want to see. I don't even know how much, it's been, I don't know how much marketability there is in him for this fight, because it's the second time and the first time didn't go well, and people know there's no mystery. It's not like Punk is going to come out there and show these great skills. We know he's not. We know what we're, so it's like that. It's not like it's the first time where you're just kind of going, oh, what's this pro wrestler going to do in a real fight? We kind of know that. So, but yeah, he's been training and says he has no interest in pro wrestling. And, but it's like, it's a moral win over WWE, Vince McMahon for him. But in the end, what did he, I guess he can take solace in the moral win, but I mean, it cost him money, cost him legal, 3 years of legal fees and something like this. I could just imagine. I just wonder what, with Cabana. I mean, it's like Punk probably, again, the legal fees probably added up to a good deal of money. I don't want to estimate, but I've been in legal situations too, and it adds up pretty quick. And it's a lot of money. It's an annoyance and things like that. He could probably afford it. He had a lot of big years in wrestling. I think he's probably set. He's going to make money on this UFC fight. And he's got plenty of ways to make money if he wants to, using his name, whether it's doing autograph shows or whatever he wants to do in life. He can find ways to make money. For Cabana, it's a tougher deal. Cabana never had $1 million years or anything like that. I feel genuinely bad for Cabana. I think he is clearly the wronged of all parties. He's the completely innocent, wronged party. And with Punk, shouldn't have been sued, but again, it's, I don't know. I think I see why it happened, but it shouldn't have happened. And it's, if he loses, especially if he loses a close fight, but if he loses the fight, I mean, I think that in his mind, if he loses a fight that's somewhat competitive, he might be thinking in his head that, this stress at the end may have made a difference. And I kind of hope that doesn't happen. But, it is what it is. That's just how it goes.
All right, everybody, and then we're going to wrap it up. We'll have more tomorrow night. Wednesday night's Observer Radio. New Observer's out tomorrow as well. Check out the front page. Lots of stuff. And that's it. We will talk to you again after a while.